Hey, good morning, everyone. This is Director Bishotsky. Thank you all for attending this Ag to Urban informal stakeholder meeting. I think we have a lot to talk about today, including the beginnings of a proposal from DWR on this program. I know we've got folks online as well, and we'll go through logistics in a minute, but I want to make people aware. I became aware this morning of a letter from Queen Creek and Buckeye to AMWA. We're still reviewing that letter, but I'll just say there seems to be some potential misunderstandings of earlier DWR examples embedded in that letter, and maybe some of the conclusions that that letter has embedded in it certainly need further analysis. So we're going to take a look at that letter, and I think as part of this whole process, we'll probably post that letter, and we'll probably post our critique of that letter as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben and to Natalie to run the meeting.
Director. Thank you, Director. Good morning, everyone. There. Thanks, Natalie. All right, everybody. So as is the case, can you all hear me? I don't feel like I hear myself very well. Okay. Let's try that. Is this better? Love it. Okay, we're going to do that. As was the case in all of our meetings, this is being recorded and broadcast, so be on your best behavior. We hope to keep this relatively informal, which means that if you need clarification, feel free to raise your hand either here physically or online, and we'll get to you. Although I will note that we have a dedicated discussion portion, so clarifying questions proper during the presentation, more nuanced discussion or critiques perhaps, better at the end. We will also be available to help with technical issues for anyone who has that online or on the phone. You can reach out to our help desk at tickets@azwater.gov. And for anyone on the phone who can't see the slide, 602-771-8444 is the number. All right, our agenda. We'll start talking about some of the opportunities that we see for an Ag to Urban program. Then we'll walk through a draft Ag to Urban proposal, and then we'll end with a discussion. So not a whole lot. We'll start with opportunities. You know this, Arizona's in an era of limits. There's unmet demand in the Phoenix and Pinal AMAs, and there are current and future shortages that we expect on the Colorado River. But we'll also note that recent legislation and rules are moving Arizona towards more designations. For example, the ADOS rules offer a bridge to designation with some applications already underway. And additionally, last session, SB 1181 and SB 1081 support designation as a proper water planning and management tool. Focusing on designations makes sense because designations provide an opportunity for holistic water management, groundwater management, including but not limited to the fact that designations assure water supply for current and projected use in their service areas. Designations are incentivized to seek and obtain alternative water supplies. Designations often control their effluent, and designations create an even playing field for all water use sectors. We've heard this talked about a lot. It shouldn't just be home builders who have to replenish their water. Commercial, industrial, and housing are all subject in a designation to the 100-year water supply requirements. In cases where providers are not yet designated, Arizona has a near-term bridge to designations. Remember, certificates have no guarantee of becoming part of a designation, and that is why we have an alternative path to designations of assured water supply through ADOS. Remember, that is the bridge to designation because paired with new alternative supplies, ADOS grandfathers in legacy pumping and provides generous groundwater allowances to help reduce costs. So with those opportunities in mind, we'll walk through the proposal. In this proposal, we'll touch on 7 major elements of a potential Ag to Urban program. First, we'll talk about program mechanics. So that's the structure, credits, applications, etc. We'll talk about eligible lands, the extent of that eligibility in the model review. We'll talk about quantifying physical availability conservation credits. That's what we're calling them. We'll talk about limiting applicability to designations, a tad more than we have. We'll talk about water use in service areas, replenishment generally, and specifically in the Buckeye waterlogged area. And then we'll talk about development conservation measures. And if that wasn't enough, then we'll turn it over to all of you to talk about it. So starting with the general structure. Under this proposed draft program, and most of you seem to have already read the slides, eligible applicants may voluntarily relinquish a right to withdraw groundwater under an irrigation grandfathered right, IGFR, within the Pinal or Phoenix active management areas in exchange for a physical availability conservation credit. Credits may be applied towards a showing of physical availability of groundwater or stored water to be recovered outside the area of impact under the Assured Water Supply Program. For the purposes of this draft program, an eligible applicant would be the owner of eligible lands. We'll talk about what it means to be an eligible land in a bit. Did this work? There we go. Okay, forgive me for getting distracted by the two screens I'm working. Okay, so what do credits do? Under this draft program, IGFRs on eligible lands may be exchanged for physical availability conservation credits. These credits, am I saying this? I'm hitting the same thing, am I? Yep. Apologies, everybody. All right, we're back. Okay, there we go. To apply to relinquish an IGFR on eligible lands, eligible applicants would voluntarily apply to ADWR. Emphasis on voluntary. ADWR staff would review the application for eligibility and quantify the amount of physical availability conservation credits. After receiving confirmation from the applicant, ADWR would issue a final determination. Physical availability conservation credits run with the lands associated with the relinquished IGFR, which means that if the land is sold, the credits go with them until they are pledged to a designation application. Credit owners may pledge the credits to a designation by submitting a notice of intent on a form that would be provided by ADWR. And I'll note that the designation term or volume could only be increased through a modification process, and we would expect an expedited modification. The draft proposal also includes a timeline for program evaluation. According to that timeline, ADWR's ability to issue physical availability conservation credits would expire after 10 years, but would have the option to extend. A built-in sunset review obviously creates an opportunity to evaluate the Ag to Urban program's success and performance. However, we'll note too that issued credits would not expire and credit holders could still pledge those issued credits. So let's talk about eligibility. Eligibility would be determined on an acre by acre basis. That means the full extent of an IGFR will not be determined to be eligible unless each acre is eligible within the IGFR. That does not mean that if any portion of the IGFR is ineligible, the entirety is. Instead, what that means that if only a portion of the acres in the IGFR meet the eligibility test, only those acres would be eligible for relinquishment and conversion to a physical availability conservation credit. So what is the test? To be eligible, an IGFR must be located in the Phoenix or Pinal active management area. It must have been irrigated with groundwater in any three, and I don't mean three consecutive, in any three of the prior 5 years to relinquishment. A groundwater savings facility's use of in lieu water would also count as irrigation with groundwater for the purposes of this 3/5 analysis. The IGFR must not have a negative flex account balance. It must be up to date on annual reports, verified by DWR for the previous 5 years, and must be compliant with conservation requirements. There must be no existing certificate of assured water supply on those acres. However, IGFRs within a designated provider service area would be eligible to participate in the program. And lastly, eligible IGFRs must pass a model review. Before I move on, I feel like I should note why having a certificate means you're not eligible. Let's remember the purpose of the program, to help convert ag uses to urban uses. If you have a certificate of assured water supply, you don't need an incentive and you don't need the ability. You've got your water and you can build. What we're looking at are those ag acres right now that do not have an assured water supply, and because of physical availability limitations, don't see that option in their near future. This provides a bridge for them, but not for issued certificates. That's where we are. Yes, sir. But what a great question, and I didn't even plant it. To reiterate, an IGFR would not be eligible to participate in the program unless it can pass a model review. And by that I mean that we would evaluate the 100-year depth to water in the cell where pumping occurs. This is an important element, and I'll note that DWR is going to continue to develop this element. So we'll roll out more details as we are ready to do that. But this would be an element of the land eligibility test. So limiting to designations. For all the reasons we discussed at the beginning, a physical availability conservation credit may only be used to demonstrate to be applied towards demonstrating physical availability to support a designation. A physical availability conservation credit would not be usable to satisfy physical availability for a certificate of assured water supply. But this does open large amounts of acres to participation in the program. Excuse me. For example, here we have a map of the Phoenix AMA illustrating the potential for use of the program by currently designated providers, as well as some providers like Buckeye and Queen Creek that could become theoretically designated under ADAWS. We looked at the relevant municipal planning areas and certificates of convenience and necessity for those providers. And doing that, we see approximately 28.5 thousand eligible acres lie in those areas. I also note that this does not include the 52,000 acres of land that have been irrigated in three of the last 5 years, but already have a certificate of assured water supply. Now, some of those may be developed, but they're being irrigated in 3 of the last 5, so presumably a lot of them aren't. Those don't need the Ag to Urban program. They already have water. Like the slide before, in Pinal, we see large potential, much more potential. And this includes current designated providers, as well as the case of the Arizona Water Company in Pinal Valley. Looking at the relevant municipal planning areas and certificates of convenience and necessity, we find approximately 104,600 eligible acres. And like it was the case in Phoenix, this does not include the approximately 96,000 acres that have been irrigated in 3 of the last 5 years, but already have a certificate of assured water supply. So let's talk about quantifying physical availability conservation credits. First, and this one's important, credits are measured and issued in terms of acre feet period, not acre feet per year. This is because we would issue them in a lump sum and not on an annual basis. To quantify credits, the department would multiply the number of eligible acres by the applicable conversion rate, and then multiply that product by 100. You can see that equation on the slide, and I put it in bold. Unsurprisingly, the conversion rates will be different in each AMA. 1 acre foot per eligible acre in Phoenix, and 0.7 acre feet per eligible acre in Pinal. I will note that we are evaluating whether some specific situations may require a conversion rate adjustment. And by that, what I mean is those situations where the groundwater use on an eligible acre may be so low that the conversion rate would not translate to actual groundwater savings. However, at this point, we're not rolling out any requirement that is associated with that, and we'll be evaluating whether that need is significant enough to need to be built in. Yes, sir. The question for those online is whether or not the converse of that situation would apply, where the groundwater use is so high that a change of the conversion rate might be appropriate. What I would say is, in the same vein as what I had said previous, I think we'll be evaluating whether something like that may come into play. But at this point, we're not ready to roll out any specific requirement. Did you have a follow-up? We have a mic for you if you need it. Okay. Thanks, Nick. Okay. All right. I know water policy is complex. A lot of it's difficult. The math here shouldn't be, but we've got an example just in case. So if you've got an owner with 100 acre feet of eligible lands in the Phoenix AMA, that would translate to 10,000 acre feet worth of credits that you could apply towards physical availability. And that's because 100 times 1 is 100, times 100 is 10,000. At least I hope my math is right. If it's not, that's embarrassing for all of us. So assuming a 50% replenishment rate, these conversion rates show the potential to save millions of acre feet worth of water over 100 years. Specifically, over 9 million acre feet in the Phoenix AMA and over 4 million acre feet in the Pinal AMA, assuming full use of the program. But let me pause and be very, very, very clear about what I mean by 50% conversion rate. This does not mean that 50% of groundwater needs to be consistent with the management goal. This does not mean 50% is all you have to replenish. When we talk about consistency with the management goal, we are applying the rules. And under the rules, which would not change under this program, 100% of the groundwater you use has to be consistent with the management goal. And to make that water use consistent, you either have to replenish or use extinguishment credits or groundwater allowances. This shouldn't be new to anybody in this room, but we want to be very clear that we are not talking about reducing that need, right? The rules as they exist would continue to apply. I'm sure there will be more questions about that in the future from somebody, but I want to try and note that, and we'll touch on it a little bit more in a bit. So now that we know the conversion rate, or the Phoenix AMA, the 28.5 thousand eligible acres that lie within the municipal planning areas or certificates of convenience and necessity for existing and expected to be designated providers would translate to an approximately 2.85 million acre feet of credits to apply towards physical availability. If that sounds like a lot, it's because it is, right? And like I noted before, this does not include the 52,000 acres of credits with certificates of assured water supply. The numbers get bigger in Pinal, where approximately 104,600 acres of eligible acres in the Pinal AMA lie within municipal planning areas or certificates of convenience and necessity and translate to 7.3 million acre feet of credits to apply towards physical availability. It's a lot. Zooming in to just one specific situation, looking at the lands that surround the Buckeye Central Service Area, for example, there are approximately 2,400 eligible acres that lie within the Buckeye Water Conservation and Drainage District and 12,000 eligible acres that lie within the Roosevelt Irrigation District, which translates to approximately 1.4 million acre feet worth of credits to apply towards physical availability in just those two districts. Like the Pinal and Phoenix AMA numbers, this does not include approximately 22,000 acres that have been irrigated in the last 3 to 5 years and already have a certificate of assured water supply. So looking at this hypothetical, Buckeye could theoretically seek an ADAS designation relying on new alternative supply of stored effluent to be recovered within the area of impact of storage in the RID GSF, and then pairing this with an Ag to Urban program could create significant opportunities for credits to be applied towards physical availability. So let's talk about service area rights. As we've indicated in past meetings, the draft program does not change a provider's ability to use water within their service areas. But a designated provider must include the retired lands in their service area. The reason for this is to make sure that new water uses on retired lands are served by the designated provider and replenished if using groundwater. We don't want to get rid of one unreplenished use to replace it potentially with a different one. We're trying to patch the holes in the bucket and move towards holistic groundwater management and planning. We've touched on replenishment a lot, probably enough, but just to hit it one more time. Nothing in the draft proposal changes how replenishment works. 100% of your groundwater use must be made consistent with the management goal using existing rules and procedures, which means replenishment, extinguishment credits, and groundwater allowances. You got to use one of those or a combination of those. But specific to the Buckeye waterlogged area, water withdrawn in the Buckeye waterlogged area will be considered consistent with the management goal under the terms of existing rules. ADWR will periodically review these conditions, both the waterlogged area conditions and application of that provision. Lastly, development on ag to urban acres must reflect the reality of constrained water supplies. So that means ag to urban providers must demonstrate that the following requirements will be met on ag to urban lands. Although I do not necessarily say that the provider will be responsible for making sure that happens, because in the case of private water providers, we understand that there are some complexities there. But on ag to urban lands, there must be prohibitions against non-functional turf, prohibitions against the installation of turf in new residential or commercial developments, prohibitions against evaporative cooling in new commercial development and upon replacement in existing development. It must be required that new builds use the IAPMO's Uniform Plumbing Code. There would be requirement for water sense fixtures in new and replacement fixtures and appliances, and there must be a prohibition for those lands against water parks, lakes, ponds, and decorative features. Remember, this is a way that we are moving away from unreplenished groundwater use during an era of unmet demand, an era of limits, right? And the building that would happen on these lands needs to reflect that. So there's a lot that we've touched on just to hit the highlights. Physical availability conservation credits can be pledged to designations to meet physical availability requirements. All other assured water supply program elements, service area rights, and withdrawal requirements continue to apply. The only thing that's changing is one way to help meet your physical availability requirements. IGFRs may be voluntarily relinquished in exchange for credits if they meet eligibility criteria. The program would come with a 10-year sunset review and the opportunity to extend. Credits would be issued in a lump sum by multiplying eligible acres by the applicable conversion rate and multiplying that product by 100. The conversion rate in the Phoenix AMA would be 1.0 acre feet per eligible acre and 0.7 in the Pinal, or 0.7 acre feet per eligible acre in the Pinal AMA. 100% consistency with the management goal is required using replenishment, extinguishment credits, or groundwater allowances, and development conservation measures are required on ag to urban lands. I know that was a lot. So we got through it in the first 25 minutes. We've got another hour and a half together to answer your questions and to talk this through. Nick, can we get a mic out here? Thank you. And I see Rob's hand up first.
Rob Anderson for Home Builders Association. We've previously stated objections to limiting this to designations and to the 1.0 credit, so I don't need to repeat those here. Just those concerns remain in place. I did have two clarifying questions. The first one is we've had a lot of discussion of sunset and expiration, and I see here you're talking about the program having a 10-year sunset review. Can you confirm how long the credits last, how long the credits could be utilized once created? So that's the first question. The second question is something that had not occurred to me before, but when you made that pretty definitive statement about certificates of assured water supply and that they have no need for this, and that makes perfect sense to me, by the way. But then we have existing designations that can freely use this credit. And I'm curious why that assumption doesn't apply to designations. in terms of being able to utilize these credits. It sounds like even though they have a designation, the designation is in place, you can still use the credits. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you, Rob. So first, when it comes to the extinguishment of credits, the way that we are imagining it is that credits would not be extinguished at the term, assuming at the end of the 10-year period, that the program is sunset, the credits would continue to apply. Now, we have thought about and are not ready to speak definitively about how this would work, but we do have thoughts about the amount of time in between when a credit is issued and when it is pledged, if there may be elements that we might have to look at to ensure that the water savings we expect would in fact be realized. So there may be some constraints there or requirements for additional analyses. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me just respond to that point.
Okay.
The usability of the credits, the time between the creation of the credit and when it's actually pledged or becomes part of a portfolio is, I guess I would encourage you to be very flexible about that. There's really no harm in a program that encourages early extinguishment and a long time frame until it's actually used. That's just going to save more water. A short time frame means that you're going to keep farming until the very, very, very last minute. And so it seems to me the risk you're facing is that somehow these credits just blow your budgets. If you have a sunset review, you've got a protection against that, because this is not going to happen all in 10 years. It's physically impossible for that to happen. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. Your point's well taken, right? The role of incentives here. So as we examine that, we'll keep that in mind. I think incentives is the right context too for this second part of your question, right? Why designated providers? And I think we've been pretty upfront about the fact that what we're trying to do is allow for development that is going to be backed by physically available water, but that is also moving us towards more holistic water management and planning through designated providers. So we're certainly providing an incentive for designated providers here, an incentive for folks to take advantage of the benefits of becoming designated in those instances where they don't. Yeah. Yeah, Nick, can we get the mic up here up front? Oh. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks. Don Pongratz for Gila River. I don't often get a chance to speak at these. Governor Lewis is on his way back from Washington, so we apologize for not being here, Tom. But he wanted us to make a statement basically saying two things. One, our initial review of this is that it's looking a lot like 100 lawyers at the bottom of the ocean, which is a really good start. But secondly, that he's ordered up an independent technical review of both approaches to confirm what the community can actually support from either, to see if there are ways to actually improve this. I can see already with this, there are things that we might want to take a closer look at. But in general, I think the message we've gotten from our consultant on his initial review is that this is a very good start towards trying to free up a substantial amount of new water and doing it in a conservative but and cautious way as the circumstances require. So that's the statement Governor wanted me to provide. Thanks.
Yes, Alex.
Okay, hopefully I'm doing this right. Alex Arboleda with Gamage and Burnham. I'm here on behalf of Harvard Investments and Cali Companies. I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how this program would affect the areas that are currently undesignated that maybe are looking at ADAs, but don't have the designations. So in designated provider service areas, they already can meet the, the assured water supply requirements. So the problem that we're trying to solve doesn't really apply to them, just as, so I guess I want to understand better, how does this help solve the problem in the areas that are currently undesignated?
Sure. So there's two problems as I see it, right? The ability to grow and constraints on that ability is certainly one of them. The other problem is that we have unmet demand in two of our AMAs, and we have unreplenished grandfathered rights that are drawing down on the aquifer. So, yes, dealing with the first problem is on our minds, but dealing with the second is too. And so providing an incentive for these IGFRs, should it be what they want to do, right? And we're acknowledging that folks farming on an IGFR are under no obligation to participate in this program, but should the outcome be acceptable to them, that there is a way to transition away from that unreplenished high water use in our designated providers where they are planning long-term. So that's part of it. How does it solve the problem? That's part of the problem we're trying to solve. Now, for those undesignated areas that you're talking about, and the problem I'm imagining that you're referring to is, how do we make sure that we can build out there? What I'll note, and we touched on this a little bit, is the Ag to Urban program is not a program to create designations. The ADAS program is the program to create new designations, although the Ag to Urban program can support that. And so in just one limited example that we gave for illustrative purposes, this is not anything more than that, but looking out at the West Valley, where if someone wants to become designated and can do that, taking advantage of a GSF, for example, where they could recover within the area of hydrologic impact if they're storing effluent, and in doing that, create a new alternative water supply under ADAS, well, then they've got that alternative water supply to unlock the possibility for designation. You don't need to go get water from Harquahala. You don't need to go buy surface water rights somewhere else, right? So right off the bat, it's opened up for you. But then you have to prove physical availability. And that's where this comes into play. Because if you're in an area like out in the West Valley where you've got these huge amounts of eligible lands, you would be able to unlock significant amounts of water to apply towards physical availability. Yeah, absolutely. I'm being instructed to make sure we're showing the Buckeye map. Stop clicking. Sorry, Natalie. There you go. Yeah, go ahead, Spencer. Unless, I'm sorry, Alex, did we get to your question, or I don't want to move on from you okay.
As it relates to conservation measures, is prohibiting turf in new residential developments, does that only apply to the home, or is that the entire development?
It would be the entire I should say the entire development on those retired lands.
Okay. As it relates to ground coverage is what we refer to it. That's trees and bushes. Has the department considered anything on that? Because with the credit available under the proposal and no ability to access water for higher density, that puts many of these projects at a very low density amount. Therefore, more landscaping, which cities obviously tell us what we need to install on that landscaping, except for the lot. How are you going to address that water demand?
I love this question, Spencer, because and a lot of the way that we've been conceiving, and by we, I mean, as a community, it seems that we're conceiving of this program is on an acre by acre basis, right? I will build on this acre. And if I'm in Pinal, for example, that means I have 0.7 acre feet, theoretically, per year for 100 years. That's not the way we're thinking about it. And that's why we didn't say you would get 0.7 acre feet per year indefinitely. But instead, we're unlocking a large amount of water, 0.7 acre feet times the amount of acres times 100, so that you have a large amount of water to work the way that you need to. And that's also why designations matter so much and certificates start to get tricky. And because a designated provider can look at their entire water portfolio and their entire service area, and they can say, okay, in this case, 0.7 acre feet per acre might not work for that particular subdivision, but we can make it work on a provider scale. And so to your point, it becomes less of a concern because you don't have to think, I've got to build a house and then cover it with something because I can't put more people on it because I only got 0.7. That's just not the way that it's designed to work. But it's really designed to allow the sophisticated folks who are designated providers and are soon to be designated providers to make the best decisions that they can with the entirety of their portfolio.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, just work it out with the designated provider as it relates to the need for more water to service the project you have in mind. Is that?
That's right. Well, yeah, when you have physical availability needs, you can meet that using either proof of physical availability or physical availability conservation credits. Yeah.
And then following up on the Appendix M requirements, we're a local code adoption state, so some cities require us to build to the IPC instead of the UPC. How do we handle that conflict? And this is the first time I've heard about it, so this may resolve itself. I don't know, but if we're required to build to a different plumbing code standard pursuant to the local authorities, how do we resolve that conflict?
That is a good one, and that's one that we're still trying to think.
All my questions are great.
Spencer, I love every question you've ever asked me. Yeah, you raise a good point, right? And we would want to make sure that we can work through how that works. This is intended to be pushing us towards conservation and pushing the state, frankly, towards getting up to speed to the best that we can and be ensuring that we're saving as much water as we can. I'm glad more people are raising their hands. I figured an hour and a half was going to be long. So I think, okay, we'll start back and then we can go to Jake. And
John Rader. John Rader with the City of Buckeye. I feel compelled to maybe make a comment more than a question just because we're up on the screen here, and we do appreciate all of the work on the department. We view Ag to Urban as a vital tool for our growth moving forward. I would note, just to the designation point, that we actually view this area as 3 different designations in the long term, and there's an indefinite timeline as to when those occur. This is certainly part of our long-term approach to water management. We don't disagree with the department regarding the importance of designation as a tool for water management, but overall, the use of Ag to Urban may not be available in Buckeye as a result of these proposed rules for several years. We'll continue to explore these ADOs with the department, with the governor's office, but just want to make that point. If this is intended to be an immediate relief or a bridge, it may be some time before it's actually available for use in the Buckeye area under the proposed rules. And finally, again, just a comment, we appreciate the recognition of the unique features of the Buckeye waterlogged area in the rules. We think that makes a lot of sense. And again, just to thank the department for their inclusion.
got it. Thanks, John. And then Jake. Does it work for all you?
That's tough.
There we go. Yeah.
Stop pressing it. All right.
Okay, great. Jake Lenderking, Global Water Resources. Thanks for having this meeting. On the conservation measures in general, I think they're really great. I'm a little confused on the turf and the 2 turf bullets. One is prohibit non-functional turf. The others prohibit certain kinds of turf. Is it, or the second one prohibits all turf. So it kind of gets rid of the first one. Is not functional turf allowed, like tot lots and soccer field?
Yes. Yeah. So, and excuse me. I'm looking at Carol, who will tell me all the ways that I messed this up later. But non-functional turf is out. And then installations of new turf with certain allowances moving forward would also be out. So you have non-functional turf now, that's got to go. As you build out, there would be limits on what turf would be available going forward. Is that right? Yeah, she says yes. Go ahead.
Just to clarify one thing, this is Natalie Mast. Think you mentioned specifically soccer fields, those types of things. Those things are typically considered to be functional turf because kids are going to be running around on it, playing sports, that type of thing. So what we're really looking at is the non-functional turf that you might see along the side of the road or at the entrance of a subdivision that folks aren't actually going to be using in any way that's really more decorative.
We'll clarify that before it comes out. Yeah, Simone.
Simone Joelsrud, City of Chandler. I just wanted to say thank you to the department for what clearly is a very thoughtful approach to this policy. And it's clear that a lot of time and effort have gone into trying to be very specific in outlining this draft proposal. The City of Chandler absolutely supports this proposal and all of the elements that have been outlined so far. It seems like a very reasonable approach to an ag to urban policy, which we agree is helpful in that extra component of trying to incentivize IGFRs to convert. And we agree that in the long run, that will save water for the aquifer if done in a very, very careful way where there's all of these kinds of guardrails in place. And so the guardrails that have been outlined today are very important to us. And part of the reason for that is similarly, the reason that we supported the ADOS program as a bridge to try to help make sure that there is a path forward and that there is a way to move growth forward in a way that moves towards designations. We see that as the bridge, and we see this as a very helpful tool to help people use that bridge. But it is important to remember that the Assured Water Supply Program also needs to protect the aquifer for existing residents, for those who have already bought homes where they were promised a 100-year assured water supply, and where existing designations have been promised that the water that's been set aside, both the groundwater set aside in the aquifer and also all of the surface water supplies that have been, and effluent supplies that have been stored underground and set aside in our designations and ensured that those water supplies will be there for us when we need to rely on them during Colorado River shortages, those sorts of things. All of those things are important. And so finding a balance where we can move growth forward, but also continue to protect existing residents is very important. We believe this draft proposal does that very eloquently.
Thank you, Simone. Thanks, Nick.
Hi, Mike Milano with Greenstone. I just wanted to ask if we were going to have another technical work group meeting, because I think there's a lot that can be covered with that 1 acre foot or 0.7 acre foot. I sent an email to you yesterday on it, but I'd like to see that happen.
Yeah, I did get your email and I meant to respond. Yesterday was a busy one for reasons all related to this presentation. But yes, I expect there's still plenty to work out. As you noted, there was more than once in one of our slides where we essentially said, there's more to do here. And I think the expertise of the folks who are on that technical working group would be very helpful to us. So yes. Yeah.
Hi, Mike Caparoso, representing BKW Farms, realizing that BKW Farms is in the Tucson AMA, but just a couple observations. But first, I need two clarifications. One is, if a farmer decides to go and split his IGFR, can he do a partial conversion based on those acres of the split? So he could stay in business, maybe take some less productive land, and then have that as a conversion for this program, ag to urban program. That's the first question.
My immediate thought was no problem at all. And then I looked at a practicing attorney to make sure. And that seems like, it seems like something that would be reasonable, something we could handle, especially when we'll already be looking at whether the entirety of an IGFR is even eligible. So
Right,
that certainly
right.
seems reasonable.
Okay, thanks. And this is probably not digging in deep enough, but can these conversions, the water use credits in a designated area, can they be used anywhere within the designation? Or are they going to be restricted to a mile buffer, or what is the direction on that?
Great question. And we're getting reports that some folks didn't hear online. So just for anyone who maybe didn't hear, can the credits be used anywhere within the designation, or what are the rules about that? And the answer would be that in the same way that water use is currently allowed throughout your designated provider service area, you could continue to use the water. Now, what we haven't really talked about is any requirements that may exist about the point of withdrawal. And that's because we're trying to make sure that we fully understand that. So I don't think we're ready to give definitive answers on that quite yet. But as far as use is concerned, yeah.
Okay, good. And finally, it's back my planning days with ADWR, I think, but I'm thinking scenarios. I see these massive saving projections for 100 years based on these conversions and credits. It's a voluntary program. Look like you're kind of projecting the water savings based on full voluntary cooperation in the AMA. Is there scenarios that can show, oh, let's say 10% of the farmers decide to voluntarily get into this program over the next 100 years, or 60% of them? I just thinking that maybe having a range of conservation potential based on scenarios of conversion might be a useful tool, instead of thinking we have tons of water in 100 years that we're going to be able to use for development. Those are my only comments and questions.
It's a good point, Mike, right? Because full utilization of the program, especially with the potential for a 10-year sunset, is certainly not a given. We do not have anything that we would be able to show you right now showing that sort of I don't want to say a suboptimal, but less than full use of the program. But that's certainly something we could look into.
Okay, thank you.
And then Simone, did you have a question? Or maybe I just saw your hand go up. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll get you a mic. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Simone Williams from Amor. So I'd like to join Chandler in saying that we very much appreciate the considered data-driven approach and all the work that ADWR staff have put into developing a well-refined proposal. I wondered if, given the 10-year evaluation period and issues such as drought, climate change that's occurring in the region, and the likely impact it could have on the actual availability of groundwater, whether you could comment on any specific metrics or approach that you would take to evaluating whether the program is actually benefiting the aquifer, given that that's the overall goal. And also whether there will be any flexibility in adjusting program components if data was to show that the expected targets of benefits are not being realized. And then lastly, will there be any mechanism for designated providers to contribute regarding relating to feedback on real world experience were you to look at revising the program later on?
These are excellent questions, Simone. We haven't gotten to that level of specificity yet, although you raised 3 excellent points about the need for clear metrics and feedback from folks. So I think what I'd say is, as we continue to develop, we're certainly open to continue conversations about what that might be. I don't think we're ready to say what that would look like yet, but they're good points. Thank you. Yeah, let's. I think you were first. We can. Got it, and then we'll go to you, Terry Sue.
Hi, hello, Nicole Sonberg with the town of Queen Creek. I just had a quick question on the conservation requirements for the program. You mentioned that no lakes or other water features are allowed. I was wondering if any lakes that are being fed by alternative sources like recovered effluent would be allowed under this program. Thank you.
The way that we've been envisioning that is a pretty strict prohibition on the ag to urban lands. And part of the reason for that is we expect that groundwater withdrawn pursuant to these credits or associated with these credits is not going to be the only water source available to these designated providers. And we recognize that these conversion rates, are lower than some folks might want. And the reason for that is we're supposed to be moving towards better water use. And so if we're allowing for some of those other water supplies to be used in lakes or ponds or water parks or whatever else, we see that as moving in the opposite direction of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Jake. Oh, I'm sorry, Terry Sue was next.
Thank you, Terry Sue. There's a follow-up to that question. Jake Lender King, Global Water Resources. We have recycled water, effluent. We use the term recycled water. It's a huge community asset. We've been really fortunate to plan throughout Maricopa the use of purple pipe before roads were in. So we have an extensive recycled water structure. And we actually require developers to use recycled water, something we distribute in a non-pressurized system. So they actually have to build a recycled water retention structure because we're not powering their landscape irrigation system, if you will, based on system pressure. They have to do that themselves as they draw it out. Is there room for that kind of recycled water use? And I just want to let you guys think about that a little bit. And we've been thinking a lot about it as well. We in fact used to say developments just need to take back all of their created wastewater in the form of recycled water. We've now taken that to the next step, saying that not only do they have to take it, but their max day, their max summer day has to be under the curve of their max irrigation day needs to be under the average day of effluent production for that individual area. So we're going to have leftover recycled water we intend to continue to recharge, but that recycled water retention structure is a key element in how our system physically functions. Just wanted to put it out there as a possibility and maybe a continued incentive for the use of recycled water or effluent.
Got it. It sounds like the question, and I see Simone, it sounds like the question is when a retention pond is serving a water infrastructure purpose, does the prohibition extend? I think we can look at that. Yeah. And Simone, go ahead. You got to follow up.
Well, I guess my question is a follow-up to Jake's question, which is, I'm missing the logic here. If on the ag to urban land, turf is prohibited, why do you need a reservoir to irrigate that turf? Even with recycled water, the purpose of that reservoir is to irrigate the turf. I understand a non-pressurized system, that's how you have to do it. But if you're prohibiting the turf, why do you need the reservoir?
Appreciate the question. There's other landscape watering needs beyond turf. Low water use plants to get water. And we also envision that developments will still want to come in with functional turf that will be irrigated with the recycled water effluent as well. So ball fields, tot lots, and so on are still eligible, I think is what I understood. So I think there's still going to be a real need, but we still plan on having real solid conservation guardrails ourselves around that.
I think excellent. Thank you for the follow-up, Simone. I think the answer would be we're certainly willing to look into the use of retention ponds as infrastructure, assuming compliant use. Absolutely. And now Terry Sue.
So my name is Terry Sue Rossi. I'm with Arizona Water Company. And I would also like to just express my appreciation for this the program that you've outlined today. You know, we're in the middle of a process here, which parts of which I'm not terribly comfortable with because it's not my comfort zone. But I feel like we're at a stage in the development of this program where it's important for us to come to terms. It's important for us to find and strike the balance. And there's a lot of things that we're trying to balance here. Whether it's the impact on the GRD, whether it's the cost of the water supply, affordable housing. I could probably list 10 different things that we're trying to balance here. And so we are not in a perfect process. And I think we have to come to agreement somehow, or we're going to end up with nothing at the end of this legislative session. So I think that's very important. Specifically, what I would like to say is the 0.7 is a change from what we've seen. To be honest, we were expecting it would be 0.5 in the Pinal AMA when it all came out in the wash. So that's a 40% increase over what we expected. So I feel like that is a significant movement on the part of the department in this process as a whole. So I want to specifically point that out. The other thing I want to point out is while it's not a 2 or even a 1, Arizona Water Company's water resource strategy is very simple. It's called We Don't Have an Exit Plan. So we intend to provide water to our customers indefinitely. We've been here since 1955. We'll be here in 2055. And so we are looking to develop a sustainable water supply for our customers. And what we mean by that is that we will provide water to our customers under any conditions, hydrologic, operational, or otherwise. What that means is our first principle is get as diverse of a water supply as we can possibly develop. And that includes multiple water supplies. It also includes groundwater. The importance to me of this program is the acknowledgement that groundwater is a part of having a sustainable and responsible water supply. So I think that's super important to us. But it is not the only water supply. Just like if we had enough CAP water to deliver that to all of our customers, that would be a bad water supply strategy, a bad water resource strategy. We need to diversify our water supplies. So that's our first principle. Our second principle is that it doesn't matter what the water supply is, we're going to use all of those water supplies efficiently. And so we need to we support things that contribute to that overall water resource strategy. I feel like so far in all the conversations that we've been having about this, whether it's the last year or this year, that this proposal is coming closer to creating that balance, striking that balance that we're looking for. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Terry Sue. I'm hearing we have someone online. Is that right, Nick? Perfect. Dave?
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Dave Roberts on behalf of the Buckeye Water Conservation and Drainage Districts, the Roosevelt Irrigation District, and somewhat on behalf of the city of Buckeye. Ben, I want to thank you for your presentation and the department for all of the detail that you provided here in this presentation and the comprehensive nature. I echo what many of the commenters shared regarding the scope of this and the fact that I think we're making a lot of good progress here. I do have a number of questions though. The first one is, I just want to go back to and focus on the Phoenix AMA because that's where my interest is and my clients are located. Is the quantity of the unmet demand currently in the model about 4.4 million acre feet?
I certainly don't want to off the cuff get this one wrong. That sounds right, Dave. What I'll note is this program is not designed to fix unmet demand for reasons like Mike brought up earlier, that we can't necessarily expect full rollout of the program, right? And so what we're trying to do is close the loopholes, get rid of unreplenished grandfathered rights where that makes sense for the right holders, move towards sustainable and holistic groundwater use, and use less water, right? So I think the answer is yes, but that's not the impetus for how we've structured the program.
It may not be the impetus, but the actual result of this, if you end up urbanizing half of the lands within the Phoenix AMA, many of those lands in the Buckeye area are in the path of urbanization. You're actually going to solve the unmet demand. So I understand that it's not directly tied to it, but in practicality, the end result will be that. The other question I have is the 52,000 acres of certificates that currently are on the books, but are not developed. Are they, is the water use associated with them currently within the Phoenix AMA model? I think it is, but I just want to clarify, make sure.
I'm no modeler, but I'm being told by our qualified experts that yes.
Okay, good. All right. So, and it seems like, despite all of the hopefully good arguments that I've made about having this program applied to certificates initially and then transitioning to designations, that's not going to fly. So it seems to me that this is very much linked to how the ADOS is going to work with this program. So, and under ADOS, there is a water tax, if you will, that's what I would call it, that applies to all renewable supplies that are developed by a provider under ADOS. So it applies to the effluent that's created from the urbanization of these lands, and then it also applies to imported water into the AMA. Is that your understanding, Ben?
I think, I don't think quite right. My mother has taught me a lot of things. She always told me that words mean things because I kept using them wrong. I think we would definitely disagree with it being referred to as a tax.
Okay, well,
to be,
for simple nomenclature, I call it a tax, whatever you
Sure.
want to call it.
Sure. Yeah, so what ADOS does is it when you bring in your new alternative water supply, and I'm relying heavily on the folks who know more than me to stop me if I get this wrong, but 25% of that new supply would be a cut to the aquifer.
Right. So, and that would apply to the effluent generated on ag to urban lands, correct?
I'm going to let Natalie.
So, oh boy. Hi, Dave. This is Natalie Mast. So just a point of clarification on what Ben just responded. Under ADOS, there is an amount of physical availability that gets grandfathered in when if an application is approved. The renewable supply that the applicant brings in, then 25% of that supply, say it's 100 acre feet that they're bringing in, and now it's 25 acre feet of that supply. 25 acre feet goes to offset the amount of groundwater that was grandfathered in under that determination. So that is groundwater that was grandfathered in under that determination that may not have been able to demonstrate physical availability otherwise. And we are simply offsetting some of that grandfathering that occurred under ADOS. There was another part to the question, and I think I lost track of it.
Well, so are you saying that?
Oh, sorry. So,
okay,
so
go ahead.
when effluent, so say someone gets designated under ADOS, and the development that they create there starts producing effluent. That effluent is now a new supply that they can use within their designation and would also go to offset some of the grandfathering that occurred at the beginning, at the original issuance of that ADOS determination. And Emily's nodding at me, so hopefully I didn't screw that up too badly.
No, I think I got it. And the purpose of this cut to the aquifer was to really kind of reduce the unmet demand that's in the Phoenix AMA. Is that accurate?
It's the offset is intended to reduce that amount of grandfathered physical availability over time, so that we're relying less on kind of that grandfathered volume of physical availability over time and more on different supplies that have demonstrated physical availability in that more traditional sense, either through the model or through other methods of demonstrating physical availability.
Okay. Well, you have to remember that these agricultural lands in the two districts that I represent are using 6 acre-feet per acre, or close to that of at least in RID, of pure groundwater. And so by urbanizing those lands, you're taking about 3.5 to 4, maybe even 4.5 acre-feet per acre of groundwater out of the model. You're giving them a physical availability credit that still has to be replenished. And while groundwater allowances go for a while, physically, they're going to have to replenish that water eventually, all of it. And so it seems to me that just because of the linkage of this to ADOS, that a provider that joins ADOS and has a large number of agricultural lands that use groundwater within their city service area, so to speak, and reduces all that pumping that's in that model now that's causing this unmet demand, that this cut to the aquifer for effluent should be relaxed, in my view, is punitive, because you're already reducing a significant amount of groundwater pumping by just urbanizing those ag lands. I would also say that, as I mentioned at the beginning, I think the practical effect of urbanizing these ag lands over time is that you're going to actually get rid of this entire unmet demand. Because of that, I even think that the cut to the aquifer on imported water should be relaxed to those providers who are doing that. I think our providers that are working with farmers who voluntarily want to urbanize their lands are actually doing a great service to the AMA, especially the Phoenix AMA, in reducing overall groundwater use, and actually leads on a closer path to reaching safe yield. May not get there, but certainly that pumping is causing a great deal of the unmet demand. And by reducing that groundwater pumping, I think we're doing a great service to the AMA's overall groundwater. And so because of that, I think this water, I call it a water tax, cut to the aquifer on both imported and effluent, ought to be relaxed for those folks, because they're making a significant contribution to reducing groundwater use. That's just more of a comment there, but I strongly suggest the department think about that, because it creates, we've got to come up with a program that's going to work. And this goes a long way, but I don't think it's quite there yet. It's the groundwater allowance that's under, and I know I'm going over on the ADOS because there's such a strong linkage between ADOS and this program now. Is the groundwater allowance for ADOS, does that apply to the certificated lands as well that are not developed, or only the current uses?
I think one of the things I think we probably ought to note, and I appreciate sort of you pointing out that yes, there are elements where these may be closely linked, certainly, but the ADOS rules are, I heard just last night, finally published by the Secretary of State. Those are done and dusted, so to speak. And so what we've been really focusing right here, Dave, is how the ag to urban program could be part of that. So we're certainly not looking at opening up how the ADOS rules would apply, or how different amounts of grandfathered allowance might be adjusted. We certainly will be better understanding as we go along how this program, as we build it out, would look.
I
They-
understand they're done and dusted, but rules can be modified and as well, and they've been modified. Certainly ADOS is a modification of the existing rules. So I think there should be more discussion about this. I'm sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to cut you off.
So a few things, Dave, about your premises. First, yep, when the ag pumping is reduced, there'll be an impact on the model. My recollections of speaking with my modelers is it's not a one-to-one relationship. You're also losing the ag recharge, which will be a big element in the opposite direction in the unmet demand. Unmet demand is also geographic in nature as well. And sorry to say this, but the specter hanging over us in terms of unmet demand is Colorado River. We will be analyzing, as we said in May of 2023, when we outed the new Phoenix AMA model in a press conference, that when it becomes more clear what our Colorado River future is going to look like, we're going to reassess allocations of Colorado River water in designations in other places, and it's going to seriously impact the outcome of the model. So we've already, for those who don't know this, we have already made a policy decision based on the unreliability of non-Indian agricultural water, that's not going to be relied upon anymore under the Assured Water Supply Program. We haven't completely assessed what that's going to do yet to pumping in the AMAs, and certainly a lot of that is in the Phoenix AMA. So there's a lot of factors to determine how much of a benefit this is going to be. We showed you some numbers attached to the 0.7 and the 1 in each AMA. But I think we'll continue to assess what's going to happen with unmet demand out into the future. And in terms of ADOS and the groundwater allowance, just kind of remember that without ADOS and without this program, when there's unmet demand, the only option is 100% renewable water supplies. And ADOS is not requiring 100% renewable water supplies, and ADOS is creating a bridge to allow some groundwater to be used. So the renewable water supplies that need to be accessed and need to be deployed, there's time now to do that. So Simone's comment earlier about all the pieces fitting together in a balance is kind of why I'm saying we need to consider all of the elements of all of these different programs.
Tom, I totally agree. The numbers that I quoted regarding the amount of groundwater you save per ag land takes into account the return flow. It's not the full 6 acre feet. It's 3.5, 4, 4.5, depending on what the efficiency of the use is. In terms of the geographic area, I mean, the way the department is utilizing the model, it's AMA wide. So I understand the need to look at different areas differently, but right now we're stuck with an AMA wide number. And so, and the savings under ag to urban is an AMA wide number as well. So I appreciate your comments. I understand the issue with respect to the loss of ground or loss of CAP water, particularly to some of the municipal water providers, specifically to some of the designated providers. But you also have to remember they have huge groundwater allowances. I think at least one of the larger cities within the Phoenix AMA has over 1 million acre feet of groundwater allowance that I think is in the model already and allowed to be pumped. It doesn't go to unmet demand. So I think there are ways for those cities to address the loss of Colorado River water, at least for the next foreseeable future, until we come up with some new supplies beyond what's on the books right now. I do have one final question. And that is if you could clarify how you're going to apply this in the waterlogged area. My sense is that the idea would be there would be no replenishment obligation so long as the areas continue to stay waterlogged. Is that how you're applying it?
Hey, David, this is Ben again. So the way that we're conceiving of it would be pursuant to the rules already on the books. Right now, as long as the waterlogged area continues to be classified as waterlogged under the statute, then the rule would continue to apply, which says that on application, groundwater withdrawn from the waterlogged area can be considered consistent with the management goal,
Okay.
but that the department can periodically review application of that provision.
Okay, I understand that. So the consistency is the replenishment piece. So I understand it. Okay. Yes, and I appreciate that. The Buckeye Water District has a piece of legislation that tries to sort of go with that as well. So we can talk about that more down the road. So anyway, I don't want to take up any more time. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on this. I think I think we're making a lot of progress here. I do think there's a big linkage between ADOS and the unmet demand and the value of this ag to urban program. And I hope we can get there. But appreciate it very much. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I see a lot of hands. I'll also note we got Mike Pierce online too. My guess is a few of these hands have to do with what we just talked about. All right, so let's go to Simone and then Paul. One there, yeah.
Thanks, Simone. I'll try to keep this really short. Simone Jolsrud, City of Chandler. And I certainly don't want to draw us even longer into the conversation about ADOS because last I checked, we're in an ag to urban policy meeting, not an ADOS, which is done and dusted. But I do just want to make sure that there's sort of an alternative perspective to some of those comments. First, I think I would take objection to the use of the term cut to the aquifer for that 25%, because it's definitely not a cut to the aquifer. A cut to the aquifer is when you store water underground, there's a certain percentage of that water that's stored that you don't earn as a credit. That's a cut to the aquifer. That's water that's actually being delivered to the aquifer that you're saying it's never coming back out. It's a gift. The ADOS 25% is not a cut to the aquifer. It is an offset to grandfathered in physical availability, which is a very, very different thing. So without, I mean, we could probably schedule a whole nother meeting to talk about that, but they're very different, right? I would also just kind of remind everyone in the ADOS concept that I think we got it backwards there. The huge groundwater allowances are not in the existing designations. They're in the ADOS. Those are huge groundwater allowances. And we were in City of Chandler, and I think consistent with some of the AMWA comments, very concerned about how large those groundwater allowances are. We also are trying to work collaboratively and find a balanced approach. And so the 25%, which helps to reduce future pumping theoretically by slowly over time starting to offset some of that grandfathered in physical availability, that's where you find that balance, right? To those huge groundwater allowances. I can just tell you in City of Chandler, our groundwater allowance is 100,000 acre feet. So we've got 1,000 acre feet per year for 100 years. Those ADOS have millions of acre feet of groundwater allowance. Those are on totally different scales. So I just think there's maybe a misunderstanding there of what the difference is between existing designations and ADOS. And while that might be necessary as a bridge to help those providers try to start securing renewable supplies, it's not the existing designations that have huge groundwater allowances.
Thanks, Simone. And your point is well taken, and probably why Natalie took my mic away. But I may have been testifying in Nevada on the day that we talked about that in a prior gig. So we'll go to Paul and then Scott. And then to Mike Pierce online.
All right, Paul Berglund, AMWA. I do think there are a lot of components about this program that are encouraging. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see how all this pencils out, both in the short term and long term, as more of these components come into focus. I did have one question about the 28,500 acre-foot figure of eligible acreage in the Phoenix AMA, and if that's what's reflected in the Phoenix AMA map. One thing that we've been looking to on our own are which IGFRs are in play, and what we've sometimes found within our member service areas is an IGFR exists on paper, but really it hasn't functionally existed for a long period of time. And so it might be that we need to delve a bit deeper into what that top level figure is.
So those acres reflect acres that both reported use in 3 out of the 5 last years or prior years and did not have an overlying certificate of assured water supply. I'd be happy to follow up with both you and Simone on the specifics there. We are working through a fair number of the kind of data issues that make it really challenging to identify what that is, how that all comes together. So I understand that that's a difficult number to nail down, and we can definitely follow up offline to talk about that.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. The other question I had just related to the other component about the model review. It sounded like the model review is location-based in terms of where the particular cell is in the model where pumping will occur, and that's the basis for whether a credit will be issued one way or another. But it sounded like in the conversation in response to a question that the credit itself almost functions as physical availability insofar as it can be used elsewhere in the provider's service area. Is that accurate, or did I mishear something?
Yeah, and the reason that the model review slide is so notably short is because we're still working through exactly how we expect this to go. But yes, the model review would be specific to the location of pumping.
But all the same, the credit to be granted is something that more or less joins with the provider's physical availability insofar as it can be used anywhere within the service area.
That's right. That's right. I'm looking at others to make sure I don't wander off somewhere dangerous again, but that's right, Paul.
Thank you.
All right, Scott and then Mike. Oh, yeah, cool. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Scott Riggins, Pinal AMA, property investor and production agriculture. I would like to congratulate the department and also thank them for the work in beginning to put this program together under difficult auspices and the various loopholes that obviously need to be closed and the situations that we exist in and how to find the compromises that are appropriate to have a workable program that'll give some benefit. I am concerned greatly, and I will elaborate the reason why, that as far as the Pinal AMA is concerned, many of the things I see presented here, not many of the things actually, just actually some of the things to do mostly with conversion factors, are going to have a program that I believe is not going to be well used in the Pinal AMA. I'd very much like to thank Dave Roberts for the discussion he just gave about Buckeye, because he makes it possible for me to have a much less amount of time I need to explain things. Because due to the eligibility rules that have been elaborated for the Pinal AMA, the farms that are going to be looked at to potentially go into this program are going to be farms that also have fairly high uses of groundwater. They're going to be farms that have 4.5 to 6 acre feet of groundwater they use every year. The benefit to physical availability by getting those average 5.5 acre feet down to maybe a 1.5 or 2 acre feet are huge, and they're immediate, and they're now, and over 100 years, they make a lot of difference. Offering up something that gets no one to engage in this program will achieve nothing. We'll be at status quo. In the Pinal AMA, the way to achieve new physical availability is with the retirement of IGFRs. That's what will make things work. There just has to be a way to do it to where it tracks properly by the entities that are trying to do it. It's accountable to those entities that are trying to do it, and it's also sufficient. In the Pinellas AMA right now, one tool of development that has always been possible is the utilization of wildcat land spits and exempt wells to create subdivisions in the 1 acre density levels. Even though that's entirely legal and able to be done, it isn't done very often because it's not economically feasible. Those kind of development densities just aren't really working in today's environment anymore. All the infrastructure, everything it takes to put things together, that doesn't work. And I will forward that the conversion factors that the department is talking about for the AMA is right about those same kind of densities. They're very small densities. And I understand the need for very realistic conservation levels to be met, but taking a 5 acre water use and taking it down to 0.7, that's an 85% reduction in water use. And I don't believe that the department is going to get many takers. I could be wrong, but I don't believe they are. I know in the circumstances that I have control, I wouldn't be interested. So Mr. Roberts' points on how Buckeye might be looking at this, it's amazing that I believe the Pinellas AMA in many circumstances is looking at it the same way, because all the acres that really don't have water supplies anymore and aren't using much water for an IGFR, they're not part of this program anyway. They're already out of it because of eligibility. So I would ask the department in reviewing Mr. Roberts' comments and these comments that maybe trying to get such an enormous conservation benefit, because it's a huge conservation benefit, you might be making participation quite small.
Well, we certainly hope that that's not the case. As we've structured this, the intent is to ensure real savings. And like the director noted too, we're not looking at the difference between the full use of ag and the full use of urban. There's also replenishment that happens under ag, or I should say, water that makes its way back to the aquifer from irrigation too, that we want to make sure we factor. And so when we looked at these numbers, that's what we were thinking about. But certainly appreciate the comments, Scott. Now online, Mike, I think you've waited quite a bit. We'll turn over to you.
Hello, can you hear me? Mike?
Yes, yes, we can.
Thank you, Ben. I wanted to follow up on a question that Dave Roberts started to ask, but I don't think it got to the point that I was interested in. Suppose you have a provider that becomes designated under ADOS and accumulates ag to urban credits and has those placed in its designation portfolio, and then acquires another alternative non-groundwater supply. Does 25% of that non-groundwater alternative supply have to be used to reduce the groundwater represented by those physical availability credits?
Right. Again, as we've all become excruciatingly aware, I'm no expert on ADOS, but my understanding, and everyone seems to agree next to me, that the 25% would apply to your new alternative, to your new alternative supply. Yes, I'm going to just give it to.
This is Emily Petrick for the department. So I think how we're envisioning these physical availability conservation credits is that they would really be their own thing under ADOS. So they would not be part of this original grandfathered volume of physical availability, and they would also not be a new alternative supply. So it would essentially be its own thing under ADOS. They would be physical availability conservation credits that could be added to an ADOS designation.
Thank you, Emily. I was hoping that that would be the answer, but wouldn't that require a modification of the ADOS rules?
Yes, we recognize that would require a modification of the ADOS rules.
Well, thank you for the clarification. That's important because otherwise the 1 acre foot per acre, 0.7 would again be reduced. So I appreciate the clarification.
Terry Sue? Get us a mic, Nick. Thanks.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure that I understand this. So the 0.7 isn't just a physical availability credit. It's the right to use groundwater within the context of your designation.
No, that's not how we're anticipating it. It would be a credit that can be applied towards physical availability, but it comes with no associated pumping right.
So it does not provide for the use of groundwater within your designation. Let's have. Yeah.
So maybe to clarify a little bit, the physical availability credit is not a groundwater right like a type 1 or type 2 is a groundwater right, where
Right.
it's an authority to pump. For municipal providers establish a service area with a 56 number, right? That service area right is your authority to pump
Right.
groundwater, and you're allowed to pump and deliver groundwater within your service area.
Yes.
And that groundwater has to be accounted for under your determinations of assured water supply, whether that's a designation or certificates. So what we're saying here is that these specific physical availability credits aren't the same as your service area, right? It's not a pumping authority,
Understand.
but it checks that physical availability box under, or helps to check that.
But it
physical-
allows you to dedicate or to, what's the word, pledge groundwater in your designation of assured water supply, which means that you are going to be allowed to use that groundwater.
It increases the amount of, it would allow you to increase the amount of groundwater that you have physical availability for under your designation.
Right. So
And maybe we're saying the same thing in different ways.
I hope so, but this is an important point. I mean, the idea, there's no value to having physical availability of groundwater in your portfolio if you're not actually allowed to use the groundwater. So we need to be pretty clear on that.
Sure.
We're allowed to use the groundwater as long as we have the physical availability credits. And if we don't, then we have groundwater allowances, first of all, actually, I'll take that back. You have to have that there. Then if you use the groundwater, you can offset the replenishment obligation through groundwater allowances, through the use of renewable water supplies, and through extinguishment credits. But I think we need to be really clear about this to folks that.
Yeah, and I think there's a few things kind of getting tangled together there, which is fair. So the service area right is unquantified. It allows you to pump and deliver groundwater in your service area to serve customers. But you have to make that water use in your service area consistent with assured water supply. And so a designated provider has a volume of physical availability. These credits can add to that volume of physical availability. There's also methods of making any groundwater use consistent with the management goal. It might be extinguishment credits, it might be replenishment. And yes, all of these things kind of have to come together, but the authority to actually withdraw water, if you can check all of your physical availability boxes, that really comes from your 56, your service area right.
I'm hoping that after 40 years, we all understand that we need an authority to withdraw in addition to a well and a well permit and all that. So I'm assuming we all understand that. But and we're talking about some of these questions that we're getting. I think that, I just think that people need to understand or to get that they are not being prohibited from using groundwater, that that's a legitimate water supply, that they can put in their water portfolio and that it is subject to physical availability. And in the case of the existing certificates and in the case of the, I guess it's actually just the certificates, that's grandfathered in. The legacy pumping is grandfathered in without being subject to modeling. But on these IGFRs, the ag to urban, we are going to subject that to modeling in the cell where the groundwater will in fact be pumped.
Sure.
This is Emily Petrick. I guess I just wanted to clarify, and if there's another question in there, Terry Sue, maybe we can answer that, but a designation of assured water supply really is, the department's determination that a water provider has the supplies available to meet the assured water supply requirements for the growth within its designation. It is not necessarily a requirement or a statement that the water provider is going to use those supplies in exactly that way. But it's really the department's determination that a water provider has the supplies that meet the assured water supply requirements. And so the physical availability conservation credits would be a supply that would meet those requirements for the reasons we've discussed today, because there's this significant reduction in current groundwater use.
All right, so I have a really practical question to ask, and I actually thought that this was what Dave was getting at in the beginning of his comments. So when we have the ag to urban and the 0.7 or the 1 or whatever, the 25% offset doesn't apply to that, right? So we're not going to then take 0.25 of the 1 and say that has to be used to offset existing pumping. That would still be applicable. That would be left alone. Is that true?
So the 25% offset would apply to, would go to reduce the grandfathered physical availability that was grandfathered under ADAS. So that there would be no offset to these physical availability credits issued under ag to urban.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm a little confused on that effluent discussion we were having earlier. And maybe my understanding is incorrect, but if 100% effluent is utilized, there is no reporting or use requirements. Is that correct? I'm not talking about a commingled supply. I'm saying as far as effluent water use, if you have 100% of effluent being utilized, there is no conservation requirements. Is that correct?
Are you talking? Sorry, go ahead. Oh, I was just going to clarify the question. When you say there's no conservation requirements, are you talking about under an ag to urban program, or are we talking more generally within the AMA?
I'm just saying generally, if 100% effluent is being used for irrigation or whatever purpose, there is no regulation. Is that correct?
I'll let Emily jump in here if I wildly mess anything up. But my understanding here is that in terms of conservation requirements, that type of thing, a lot of our regulatory authority is based in groundwater. Now, we do have folks continue to report so that we can verify whether they're using groundwater in any given year, because any amount of groundwater used means those conservation requirements apply. But if they're not using groundwater, there's not any volume of water for them to be out of compliance with. So functionally, I think what you're saying is correct, but there's definitely some nuance there.
Well,
And
I'm hedging
Emily's making faces.
into alternative uses, and if, let's say, a water provider wanted to take water from their wastewater treatment plant and apply it or put it into a lake that's 100% effluent, what are the restrictions? And how can those restrictions be imposed in a alternative program?
So the question is, uh, and maybe this is a separate conversation. You're asking what the restrictions would be on a provider taking effluent directly from a wastewater treatment plant and putting it in a lake. And depending on the exact details, there are some restrictions that could apply there. I don't even want to try to get into quoting the details of lake spill there. But yeah, perhaps that's a separate conversation that we
And that's
have.
fine.
There's
Just got a little confused about some of that conversation earlier. If a water provider wanted to, I'm not a lake advocate, but if they wanted to build a lake out of effluent and only effluent, and there was no commingled supply going into that lake, I don't think there's restrictions, but I might be wrong. I mean, that's my question basically, but we can take that.
Yeah, and maybe what I would clarify there is that under this proposal, there would be groundwater being used on those lands. And so in most cases, those supplies would be commingled. And that's really what we're kind of referring to under this proposal, that if you're thinking about the designation, if you're thinking about those supplies, if you're thinking about converting agricultural water to urban uses, utilizing these credits, then there's some additional requirements that apply on kind of in addition to your typical prohibitions on lakes and those types of things. And maybe I said that inartfully.
Definitely a gray area there for me, and it could be not the way I'm thinking, but maybe a little more clarification on the use of effluent as an individual water source for a purpose of use within a designated provider area could be clarified or looked into as a condition.
This is Carol Ward with ADWR. To help hopefully clarify that point a little bit, in this proposal, it was the intention that given that we have unmet demand in the model and we are providing this pathway forward, that these areas would need to take additional measures to reduce demands, increase efficiency. And the idea was in that one particular bullet, and I realize these were very, high level bullets with no detail attached to them, just so we can move quickly through this presentation today. We will flush those out more, but the intent was that there would be a prohibition on water parks, lakes, ponds, and decorative water features regardless of the water source. So, those water sources, all need to be maximized, put to their best possible use, and we need to, wherever possible, reduce demands, increase efficiencies. So these would be additional requirements. I hope that helps. And we can certainly talk more about all that.
All right, we'll go online then. Oh, we got one more here in the room then too. Okay. So we'll go to Paul and then to Kathy, and then we'll come back to the room.
This is Paul Gardner with the Town of Queen Creek Water Resources Director. Thank you guys for the presentation today. This has been very helpful. A lot of new information, a lot of information. I don't think anybody, well, I'm sure there's some people understood that are a lot smarter than I, but this is really good information for us going forward. We really feel like the 1 acre foot per acre is doable for Queen Creek. We're looking at bringing between 0.4 to 0.5 per acre foot back on treated effluent. So that would actually get us about 1.4 to 1.5 acre foot per acre. We think that's doable for us. We appreciate the the non-ornamental turf and some of the other restrictions. We do have a lake program out in Queen Creek where we try to match the landscaping needs of a development with their treated effluent that they produce, or their effluent that they produce, and the treated effluent we can return. And all that water is then used by the HOA to water and maintain all their landscaping. But those are some of the things I guess we want to talk to the department at another day. And so we appreciate the work going into this. Somewhere along the line, we need to merge both this and the legislation going through, because now we're on two completely different paths. And we need to get those two to go forward if we're going to have a successful program. So we're not against becoming designated. We're still trying to work our way through how we become designated and what water supply we can use to move forward on designation. And we're going to need some help with the department offline on what type of effluent that we can bring forward, or what other water supply before we have Harkehala cured and pledgeable. But we appreciate this presentation today. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And Kathy, I think you're next.
I don't think you can hear me, right?
We can.
Oh, you can. Oh, thank you. I couldn't see that I was not unmuted. Thank you. Well, hi. Thanks for letting me ask a question. So I'm going back to the question that Terry Sue was pondering with you all and Emily's answer. And I want to make sure that I really understand this. So this physical availability conservation credit is added to the amount of groundwater previously determined to be physically available to a designated water provider. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. But even though it's physically available, the other requirements of the assured water supply rules apply. So, for example, its use of that water has to be consistent with the management goal. Correct?
Yes, not just that, but yes.
So,
every other part of the assured water supply program.
Yes, and in order to be consistent with the management goal, that might require replenishment. In other words, it might be considered to be excess groundwater.
That's correct.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. All right, I think we're back in the room then. Forgive me if I forgot where that hand was. Oh, there we go.
Hi, it's Nick Vanderway, a Buckeye farmer and land investor. And I just want to, again, keep sight of what's, we're trying to incentivize landowners, ag landowners to convert. And by not allowing the certificates, what you're saying is my ag ground, is valuable to the city because it allows them to develop desert ground. It puts it in the big pool. And, still today, farm ground's worth more than desert ground. Why? Because it has water and you can do something with it. And, we're using 6 acre feet and we know the savings that is there. The presentation to the Water Policy Council last June in 2024 showed that if the RID fully converted to ag to urban, and I think they went from 5.8 to a 1.8. The groundwater level would rise 300 feet in some areas. Well, that's 200 feet above ground level. Okay, you guys know it's going to save a lot of water, and so putting recharge on top of that is only going to exacerbate the waterlogged area. We've been pumping 6 acre feet for 100 years and the level is not going down. That's not fossil water in Buckeye. That's continuously replaced water. And the quicker we develop, like Dave Roberts pointed out, the quicker we solve the whole model problem. I mean, we take that 6 acre feet, reduce it, convert it to, urban uses. Everything gets satisfied much quicker. In Buckeye, it just seems silly to only add 1 acre feet and then do full replenishment. It's just, where's my motivation to stop farming?
Thanks, Nick. So a couple things there I just want to clarify, and the director noted this at the beginning, that we're certainly aware of some of the claims you alluded to that were in a letter that just recently came out. One, for example, you said that the groundwater levels would increase by 300 feet. From the conversation that was had in June, that was a difference of 300 feet in the rate of decline, the level of decline, I should say, not 300 feet, especially not above groundwater or ground level. So just one note there. And then I'll also note, as we said in the presentation, that in the Buckeye waterlogged area, we're not going to be requiring full replenishment beyond what is required by the rule, which is on application, your use would be considered consistent with the management goal.
Thanks. And that would apply to the BID, but the RID, which is just immediately north of it, requiring them to replenish is just going to move the waterlog even further north. It's just a lot more water going to be going into the ground.
Well, we certainly can take a look at conditions as they change, assuming that they do. We're in our last final few minutes, so certainly happy to take any questions if there are any outstanding. Otherwise, we'll move to next steps. Okay. So what I recognize and what you all probably saw is the disincentives to off-the-cuff remarks, because sometimes you get things wrong. So what we wanted to do is make sure you all have a period of time to put together your thoughts and submit them to the department. Now, of course, there's no hard and fast requirement that you must have it in by March 5, 2025, but we'd appreciate if as many folks as could do that. And that would allow us to have a week to evaluate those, get a sense of themes that start to emerge. And then our next planned meeting would be on the 12th. So that's 2 weeks away for our next meeting, 1 week away to hopefully have all of the comments from you fine folks and to start thinking about the reactions to this proposal, thoughts about this proposal, clarifications needed, and additional development. So that's what we'd like to do for next steps. Of course, we're at your disposal as things continue. We have our dedicated webpage, which will be updated with the information that you've all seen today. And we have a dedicated email address where you can send all of your compliments for the program and questions and critiques. So with that, assuming there's no other outstanding questions, I think that'll be good. All right. Thanks so much, folks.